Tech Women program is very well known in Silicon Valley and supported by different biggest giant companies and organizations. And Claudia Galvan, she's one of the mentor and one of the coach who is helping emerging leaders from different countries, from 21 countries, to become the better version of themselves and to be engaged in the different trending topics and spheres in the IT field. And Claudia, she's a technical advisor for different startups in the Silicon Valley. She's very good in building products and developing the products from the ground up to the billions users products and internationalizations.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction and for inviting me to present, Elena, to your group. Today, we're going to be talking about creating a world-ready, minimum viable product using Agile. Then, with the current situation, since every single product goes and becomes worldwide ready from day one, then yes, day one, you're global. Now, as Elena mentioned, that is a small town south of Silicon Valley. And I was working there when I met my husband, and he was working in Silicon Valley. Then I got a job at Oracle. At Oracle, I started to lead global product development. And a couple of years after, we decided to start a family. And actually, Oracle was a little bit far from my house. Then I got an offer to work at Adobe, where I basically led the international team. This is the engineering team to ensure that all the Adobe products work in all the different languages and countries. But one of the big things that I did over there was to basically lead the development for the Adobe Updater. And many of you probably know it's that little thing that says it's like you need to update your Adobe product. Well, I led that development. And now it's in every single device, in every single language, in every single country. And after I was at Adobe when Microsoft saw me presenting, and they basically called me to lead the international team in Silicon Valley. And I basically worked for almost 8 years there, leading the internationalization of Microsoft Online Services that include Windows Live, Bing, and MSN. Into 48 languages and 165 markets. I left Microsoft because they invited me to join a startup. That was very exciting. If you are in Silicon Valley, one of the things that you want to do is to basically participate in a startup. Then I started to work in startups ever since. And it has been a really, really cool experience because there is a huge difference between working in a big company and working in a small company. And maybe we can talk more about it a little bit later. But a couple of more things that I have been doing. I took the opportunity to do my master's degree and my doctorate degree. And I also volunteered for Tech Women for the last 10 years. I have volunteered for the Anita Borg Institute that many of you know that is about empowering women in technology, for the Society of Women Engineers and Technovation program and many more. Then I'm very involved in those efforts. But usually they can be between like a couple of week cycles. And each one of these little cycles, is going to be called a scrum. And basically it works through splitting the problem into like smaller parts. And then there's different teams in an Agile team. Then you basically in an Agile, you're going to have your developers, your QA, maybe your UI designer. You're going to have your product owner, who is like the subject matter expert, who basically is the liaison with the customers, and is kind of like the voice of the customer in the team. You have the Scrum Master, who is basically like the project manager, who's going to be like driving like the different phases of the project and making sure that the things get done. And then you have like all your stakeholders, customers, and users. And another key element of Agile is what is called a user story. Then we talked about the backlog, and the backlog is about creating all these basically requirements for the product. And the way that you describe this backlog, is through what is called use cases and user stories. Then you can go and say and then the user, and we'll go through this. I'll give you examples. I want to, so that. Then that's kind of like the standard template that you use to create your user stories that go into your backlog. All right, then what is global product development? Then I'm going to walk you through some of the standard terminology. And I usually like to use this method. It's not, this example. Then everybody's familiar with Coke. And basically Coke creates, a can that has the actual Coke liquid inside, right? But the can is basically the same can shape, everywhere. But the text is basically translated, and that is called localization, and it is abbreviated as L10N, and internationalization is abbreviated as I18N. And what that means is between the I and the N are 18 characters. And then marketization is when they basically go and they customize the flavors for the different countries. Then basically you may have a can that has like different language on outside and then different flavor inside. And all that is called globalization. Then when you're doing global product development, you have to think about all the different parts of the company. You're going to have a web app that is basically your app that runs on a PC or a Mac. You're going to have your app that runs on your mobile phone. You're going to have a website where you're going to have all your marketing and kind of like the company page and all that. You're going to have all your backend with the operations. You're going to have all your business processes that include legal, finance, marketing, PR, and all that. Then you basically it applies to the whole company. Okay, then now that we know what is global product development, now that we could understand what is Agile, then we're going to talk about what's minimum viable product. Okay, then this is how a product will look like. This will be like the framework. Then at the very bottom, you have your database and your files, everything in Unicode. Remember we talked about Unicode? There has to be a local. We talked about local, then there will be a local-based directory, and then there will be like the notifications. Then there will be an API of a cross-platform library that supports all the globalization. Then you have your platform API. And then in the front end, you have your local aware app, and then you have all your analytics. And at the same time, you have all your tools, your build scripts, your localization scripts, and so on. Then how do we measure that our minimum viable product has good quality? Then this will be called fidelity. Then because it's a minimum viable product, then we may want just to use Google Translate to translate it instead of like real translators. And then once we go through different interactions, then you get like real translators to basically translate and just, polish it out. Then for some just selected use cases, And then you take the opportunity to create what is called false stores. That is basically putting together like a button and just measuring how many times people click on that button, and even if it doesn't do anything, just to get a sense if people are interested in that particular feature. And then finally, there's just the A/B testing, just to ensure that that everything is working and okay. Then we talked at the beginning about like the very small cycles that were the scrums, and then the agile is actually the agile part is that you're continuously doing these the scrums over and over again until you basically have a full and a market-ready product. Then on the internationalization side, you have to ensure that you build your internationalization infrastructure and that you don't reinvent the wheel. There are libraries, then you don't have to write like the whole APIs from scratch. And you have to ensure that you create all your scripts to ensure that you automate as much as possible, that you have your standard IDEs, that everything is safe in your source code repository, that you automate your pseudo translation, you're using Google Translate, right? And then interaction with the translation management system, and the localization vendor portals, such that we everything is integrated. All right, now the localization part. Again, the infrastructure has to be there with all the localization tools. You have to have your translators to ensure that there's going to be translated, and translation is not as straightforward, because depending on what type of product, you're going to need a specialized translators. You cannot use just any translators, because the language varies depending on the type of product that you are using. And also, for anything that is legal, you need translators who are basically focused on the legal area, and ensuring that the quality of the translation is acceptable. And the marketization, then this is where you decide what is the level of market presence that you are going to have in a particular country. And there is depending on the level of investment that you're going to have there. All the companies are releasing every 2 weeks. Then, they basically, it just depends how quickly and what is your plan and all that. Then I would just start with getting everybody to be trained, and just to start with one team in the company with something that is not super critical, and that team then can start passing it on to everybody else, and all that. In the startups, it's a little bit more loose. Then you can actually see the difference, like in many big companies, I'm not saying all of them, like, people are very polite, and all that. But in the startups, everybody's like screaming, just like, talking over each other, it just depends on the culture. The CEO is going to, the CEO and the functional leaders are going to set the culture of the company, right? We prefer, like I usually prefer a more, like I do prefer a more, just a nicer way of communicating, right? And better teamwork. But the other things in the startup, things happen super, super quick. And in big companies, things take a lot of time. Now, one of the things that the startups don't realize is that very quickly, once you start to get traction, there's going to be a lot of what is called overhead that you need to basically take into account. Your human resources, your sales team, your customer support team, your operations. It's like keeps growing and growing and becomes really expensive. Then at the beginning, you just have to be fairly careful with your money. And then, after that, after you start to produce revenue, then you can start, you usually are reinvesting the money continuously into the business so that it keeps growing. But I hope that helps.
So the question, how to track technical debt that is increasing as features becomes always a priority to fixing hot fix solutions.
I hate technical debt. Everybody does. Then even startups have technical debt. Also, many of the startups, because they start and they do basically everything super quickly with the cheapest, with the free tools, and then you have to basically start, rewriting everything. And that has happened to me at tons of times. It happens in startups, it happens in big companies and all that. Then you have to basically create the technical debt becomes part of your backlog. And let me give you an example. Then I was in this startup that was going to internationalize. And I looked at the code, I looked at everything that they had, and there was like, and I was like, okay, then we can this is what we need to do in order to internationalize, the web app, the website, this is what we need to do. Then, but all this was written in code that was like 2 years old, and free tools and everything needed to change, right? Then the CEO decided, and the engineering team decided that they were going to rewrite everything. But at the same time, I had my project that I had to launch into all these different languages. Then we had to make an executive decision. We're like, okay, we're going to enable just for this amount, very tiny, small markets and language in the old code, in the legacy code, because we could do it really quickly. And everything new is going to be built scalable for all the different languages and all the different markets, but all the new code was going to be built, with internationalization in mind. Then basically it was a little bit of double effort, but it allows us to basically launch into the market quickly while this other stuff was going to be rewritten.